The blind lioness lay perfectly still, her massive body curled in on itself like she was trying to disappear into the dry earth. If you didn't know better, you'd think she was just sleeping, but the keepers at the sanctuary had seen enough animals give up to recognize the difference. This wasn't rest. This was surrender. Her name was Amara. Years ago, she had ruled a stretch of savanna with quiet, unshakable authority. Her golden eyes once scanned the horizon with razor focus. Her paws carried her silently through tall grass. Her roar scattered hyenas and sent antelope bolting for cover. She had been a mother, a leader, a queen. Then, in a single season, everything was taken. Poachers came in the night. They weren't after her meat, or even her pelt. They were after something else. They laid out cheap, cruel poison meant for scavengers and predators. Amara didn't eat the bait, but she fed on an antelope that had uppy dawn. She was blind. The toxin burned through the delicate tissue behind her eyes. What began as a stinging irritation turned into a numbing darkness that swallowed her whole world. In less than 24 hours, the lioness who once saw everything saw nothing at all, her pride scattered. Instinct told them something was wrong with their leader. Weakness, hesitation, stumbling steps, none of it fit the lioness they knew. One by one, they drifted away, following scent and instinct into the wilderness, leaving Amara behind with nothing but the memory of their warmth. The fact that she even survived long enough to be rescued was a miracle. Rangers found her collapsed near a dried-up waterhole, ribs showing, fur matted with dust, empty sockets clouded over with a milky film. She swayed when she tried to stand. Her roar, once a powerful warning, had faded into a hoarse, broken cough. They sedated her gently and brought her to a wildlife sanctuary on the edge of the reserve. The staff did everything they could. They treated her infections. They fed her carefully measured portions of meat. They gave her shade, water, safety. Physically, she began to recover, but something inside her didn't come back. Amara moved like a ghost trapped inside a cage she couldn't see. She paced only a few steps at a time, feeling the ground with careful paws, then retreating to the same worn patch of dirt where her scent was strongest. She lay there for hours, head bowed, ears barely flicking at sounds. Days turned to weeks. Weeks began to slide into months, and slowly, as her body got stronger, her spirit got weaker. She stopped responding when keepers spoke softly near the fence. She didn't look toward the rustle of birds or the distant calls of other animals. She ate only because food was placed in front of her, but there was no curiosity no spark to no fight. She was breathing, existing, not living. The sanctuary director, a quiet, weathered woman named Lila, watched all this with an ache that kept her awake long after the radios went silent for the night. She'd seen injured animals before. Broken legs, torn ears, missing tails. Animals who'd been caught in snares, shot, hit by cars. Abandoned. As she'd seen them raged, as she'd seen them fight, as she'd seen them recover in ways that made science look small. But with Amara, it was different. The lioness hadn't just lost her sight. She'd lost her purpose. Point one evening, the sky burning orange behind the acacia trees. Lila leaned against the fence of Amara's enclosure, arms folded, eyes wet. "You've got to want this," she whispered, voice cracking. Amara didn't move. Lila watched the rise and fall of that massive chest, so steady, so quiet. No growls, no tail flick, no low huff of warning, just silence. "Please," Lila murmured, "don't quit yet." Behind her, a pair of paws padded softly across the dirt that a wet nose bumped her elbow. Lila exhaled, a tiny smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Hey, brave boy," she said, turning, standing beside her, tail swishing slowly. Was Keto a rescue in his own right? Keto was a medium-sized mutt with shepherd markings, one floppy ear, and a thin white scar running along his muzzle. He had been found as a pup on the highway, dragged by a rope and left for dead. A driver stopped, scooped him up, and brought him here. He grew up in the sanctuary like a strange honorary volunteer, half guard dog, half therapist. He walked with injured antelope. He slept outside the enclosure of a traumatized cheetah until she finally started eating again. He shadowed new calves in the small rehab paddocks, barking whenever a stranger got too close. He didn't belong to one species, he belonged to all of them. And lately, He'd been lingering outside one particular enclosure more than any other. Damaris. Lila scratched the top of his head, fingers digging into the scruff of his neck. You feel it too, don't you? She murmured that Keto's gaze didn't leave the lioness. He stood at the fence, ears forward, body still, not fearful, not excited, just focused, like he was listening to something only he could hear. Inside, Amara shifted the slightest bit, nose twitching. She could smell him now, dog, dust, grass, and beneath it all, something else, something alive and unafraid. Still, she didn't move. Days passed in a slow, heavy rhythm. Sunrise, feeding, silence, sunset, silence, night. But Keto's routine changed. He began to show up at her fence every morning. Not barking, not pacing, just lying there, pressed into the ground, his body parallel to hers on the other side of the barrier. When she moved her head, he lifted his. When she heaved a sigh, he exhaled softly too. The keepers noticed. One afternoon, Samuel, a young keeper with a camera habit, filmed them through the mesh. The blind lioness motionless in her dust bowl, and the scruffy dog outside the fence, watching her like a sentry guarding a queen who'd forgotten her crown. He posted a 10-second clip online. No dramatic music, no text, just a caption. Our rescued dog refuses to leave this blind lioness alone. Almost overnight, the video exploded. Millions watched. Comments poured in. Dogs really are angels. She's given up? He hasn't. Please tell me she gets better. But inside the sanctuary, life didn't change. Lila didn't care about views. She cared about the lioness who had stopped caring about herself. Online, people were calling Keto a hero. In real life, he was still just a dog lying in the dust beside an animal who didn't even lift her head when he arrived. Then one evening, something shifted. It happened so quietly that if Samuel hadn't been watching through the window while washing syringes, he might have missed it completely. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant rain. Keto trotted to his usual spot by Amara's fence and lay down. He inched a little closer than usual. He let out one low, soft whine, not loud enough to startle, just enough to say, I'm here. Inside the enclosure, Amara's ear flicked. Her head moved a fraction of an inch. Her nose lifted. She inhaled, drawing in his scent. Samuel froze, dripping syringe in hand. Come on, he whispered to himself. Come on. Keto whined again, a fraction longer. The lioness blinked slowly, milky eyes unfocused, but her head turned, blind gaze landing almost perfectly where he lay, as if she could feel him more than see him. It was the first time in weeks she'd shown any interest in anything. The first time her attention had been pulled out of that silent, terrible grief. Lila didn't know about it until later, when Samuel burst into her office with damp hands and a shaking voice. She moved, he said. Lila looked up from the paperwork. What? Amara. She turned toward him, toward Keto. Twice. I swear. That night, Lila sat at the fence with Keto until the stars spilled across the sky. She spoke in a low voice, not sure whether she was talking to the lioness, the dog, or herself. She remembers, she said quietly. Something inside her remembers. In the days that followed, those small moments kept happening. Keto would arrive. Amara's ear would flick, her nose would twitch, her head would angle ever so slightly toward the sound of his pause. The sanctuary staff began to adjust their schedule without even talking about it. They timed Amara's meals for when Keto was nearby. They did their checks quietly when he wasn't, not wanting to break whatever fragile thread was forming between them. Still, from the outside, it didn't look like much. A blind lioness laying in the dirt. A rescue dog sleeping at her fence. No dramatic recovery. No roaring comeback. Just the slightest hints that somewhere inside that heavy chest, her heart hadn't shut completely. One morning, something happened that nobody could explain. It was early. The sun was just beginning to burn through the mist. Lila walked the perimeter with her clipboard, scribbling notes, counting animals, scanning fences. When she reached Amara's enclosure, she stopped dead. Keto wasn't outside the fence, that he was inside it. The heavy gate was still latched. The gap under the chain link was way too small for a dog his size. Yet there he was, standing less than 10 feet from a full-grown lioness. The same lioness who, in her prime, could have brought down a buffalo with one swipe. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Lila's throat locked. Keto stood perfectly still, tail low, ears slightly back, not afraid, but respectful. His body language was quiet, calm, almost apologetic. Damara's head was lifted, facing him. Her nostrils flared, drawing in his scent like a lifeline. The distance between them was a breath. Lila's survival instincts screamed at her to shout, clap, anything to distract the lioness and call Keto out. Her heart, however, whispered something else. Wait, just wait. So she did. The wind carried dust and dry grass between them. The sanctuary was still in that moment. The other enclosures quiet, birds just beginning to stir. The hum of the generator faint in the background. Amara inhaled again, a longer, deeper breath. Then, slowly, painfully slowly, she pushed herself up onto her front legs. The motion was shaky and unsteady. Her muscles had grown soft from too much lying down. Her front paws shifted, claws digging into the earth for balance. But she did it, for the first time in days. Amara was sitting upright. Keto froze, eyes fixed on her face. She turned her head toward him, blind eyes focused on a darkness that held only one bright thing: the smell of a living creature who wasn't afraid of her, who hadn't left her, who showed up every day like it was his job. Her lips parted just slightly, not in a snarl, not in a threat, in a soft, almost curious grimace. A lion's version of a question. Who are you? Keto took one cautious step forward. Lila held her breath so long her lungs burned. If Amara lashed out, it would be over in an instant. One swipe of that paw, one snap of those jaws. But it didn't happen. Keto lowered his head until his nose almost touched the scarred fur on her leg. That he inhaled, then exhaled slowly through his nose. Amara remained still, letting him smell her. When he lifted his head, her whiskers brushed his muzzle. The contact was so gentle that it might have been an accident, but it wasn't. That it was the first physical connection she'd allowed since losing her pride, the first time she'd let another creature into the small, silent circle of her grief. Lila stepped back from the fence, one hand covering her mouth, eyes filling with tears. This isn't just survival, she whispered. This is something else. The staff spent the rest of the morning trying to figure out how Keto had gotten inside without triggering a single alarm or catching anyone's attention. The conclusion, in the end, didn't matter. That he was there because he wanted to be. From that day on, everything changed. Under careful supervision, Keto was allowed, for brief windows, to enter Amara's enclosure, not during feeding times, not when she was agitated. Only during those quiet hours when the sun was soft and the air was still. When she was most inclined to rest. First, they kept him close to the fence, calling him back if he strayed too near. But they didn't have to. Keto seemed to understand exactly where the line was. He never rushed her, never barked, never jumped. He simply walked slow circles around her, nose to the ground, mapping the space she couldn't see, his movements careful and precise. Sometimes, he would trot about 10 or 15 feet away, then come back to the same spot, panting softly, as if demonstrating the boundaries. Here is safe. Here is where you can move. Amara listened. One tentative step at a time. First, she followed only with her ears, turning her head toward the sound of his paws. Then she began to shift her weight when he moved, her paws scraping the earth, claws cutting tiny grooves into the dirt. One afternoon, while Keto paced a slow circle, Amara did something that made the entire staff stop what they were doing and run to the fence. She stood, not halfway, not on shaky elbows, all the way, her front legs stretched, her back legs planted with effort. Her tail swept once, just once, across the dusty ground. She took one step, then another. They were clumsy and small, but they were steps. Keto reached the edge of the enclosure and turned, checking her position. When he saw her standing, his body vibrated with a barely contained excitement. He didn't bark. He seemed to know sudden noises might startle her, but his tail whipped back and forth in a blur. The dog who had once been broken, who had once lain on a highway bleeding, was now leading a blind lioness back into her own body. That night, the sanctuary group chat exploded. Samuel sent a grainy video of the moment to Lila, who watched it under her mosquito net until her eyes blurred. She stood. She whispered into the darkness. Smiling through tears, she stood. Word got out faster than anyone expected. The original cliffside video of Keto at the fence resurfaced. But this time, people shared new clips too.